All right, this is the second episode of what I'm calling, and we could vote on this afterward later on. I want to call it the MMA triple slash line because I like that. I think it's clever. It actually gets to scouting terminology and not just prospectus, which is really far too grand for the audience that we're pitching this at. But this is the second episode. The not because we sort of kicked this off on an informal note a couple or like a week, 2 weeks ago, with a look Pat and I at sort of the MMA prospect landscape. But now we're going to kind of turn this into a regular thing. We want to do it maybe semi-weekly, something like that. So the MMA triple slash line. I'm here with Pat Wyman, TP Grant. Guys, good to have you on.
Hey, good to be here. I'm glad we finally got this rolling. This is gonna be a lot of fun for those of us degenerates who watch way too much regional MMA and want to do something with it.
Yeah. Oh,
You there?
I am here. I'm having Chrome problems.
Oh, okay. Well, we can at least hear you. We can't see you, but talk away.
Well, then you're getting the right end of that bargain. I'm really excited to be.
Oh, we've lost him.
We've lost both video and sound, and all of this after I went out and bought a webcam just so that I could finally have my face on here. Suddenly, Tom's equipment goes haywire.
All right. So while Tom sorts his shit out, a big thing I wanted to talk about was sort of this idea of talk more about heavyweight and light heavyweight scouting because it's something I've been doing a lot of, and in some ways how Bellator does a better job of scouting. And a return of TP Grant.
There we go. I'm that guy on our first episode or second episode, I guess is it. Lucky me. So I was saying I'm really excited about this. We get to treat MMA as a serious sport. Something you could really use considering the bad run it's been having this year so far.
This is very true. It's something that I've been wanting to do a lot more of lately. And so apart from the heavyweight, light heavyweight thing, I think the big thing we wanted to kick off was just a few guys we're excited to watch soon. That's, I think, the easy place to start. There are a bunch of guys that have been signed in the past year, and we wanted to get to know, who are we waiting to watch? Wyman, I know you had some people that you'd been thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is it makes sense to start with this because it'll be, we're talking generally about guys who are fairly highly touted for one reason or another, who have yet to make their debuts. But it'll give a sense into what when you're scouting a lot of prospects and you're looking through a lot of film and you're looking at a lot of kind of extraneous data about who they are, where they come from, how old they are, what camp they're at. Exactly what it is that gets us excited about a prospect, like that makes us think like this dude is going to be really good and is going to be worth paying attention to on that basis. So I was going to toss out a couple of names just to get us started, and the first is somebody who's debuting in a little over 3 weeks. Tomas Almeida, who is 17-0 with 17 finishes. He's Brazilian. He's fighting out of the newly resurgent Chute Box camp down in Curitiba, and he is a Brazilian Muay Thai champion. I think his record in Muay Thai was 29-2. And he is just, he's just fantastic. He's one of the very best offensive kickboxers I think we've seen make his UFC debut in a very long time. Possibly. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he may be the most talented striker we've ever seen at that stage of his career, making his debut. Because he's only been fighting for about 3 years. But just a tremendous talent who pushes a fantastic pace. Which is a big thing that I look for when I'm scouting. I look for guys who are throwing 12, 15, 16 strikes a minute, because their output is always going to drop when a guy moves from the regional scene to the UFC. As guys' defensive skills get better, as they get better at dictating distance and staying out of range, a guy's output is always going to drop. So when you're looking at a guy who's going to be a kind of a high-paced fighter in the UFC, he's got to push just an absurd pace on the regional scene. And Almeida is a guy who can do that. He also has big power in his hands. He strings together really nice technical combinations. And he seems like he can do everything else well enough at this point to at least get by while the wrestling and the grappling come along. So he's one of mine. I mean, I figured we could go around a little bit, have everybody pick one or two to talk about. But so Zane or Tom, what do you think? Who's somebody you're really stoked for?
Tom, that's you.
Well, I've spent so much time in the last couple of weeks looking at guys who've not signed with the UFC. I've kind of lost focus on some of the guys who have signed recently, though I was really excited today because we had a bunch of guys going over in Eastern Europe that Zane and I had either scouted for our welterweight list that just went up today or had kind of come onto our radars in other weight classes. And I haven't seen any results for that yet. I'm not exactly when it sure goes down today, but those are some fights I'm actually looking forward to. I'm going to butcher some names here in a second. Not quite Kid Nate levels of butchery, but I have my own special little flair I like to put on these. Marif Priev of our list, our number 8 welterweight, I believe fought today, and I would be very, very interested to see how he did. He's one of those guys that even for as young as he is, I think Zane put it really well on our list that he is just crafty for his age. He shows a real feel for kind of fighting in general that you usually see more in veterans than you do in guys who have been fighting less than 4 years. So he's one I'm really excited about. And then a matchup coming up in a couple of months outside of the UFC that caught both mine and Zane's eyes as a test of a good prospect is going on in Bama, I believe, as Michael Labat takes on, what was his name? This super athlete out of...
Walter Gahadze.
Yes, and exciting guy, but Gahadze, or how do you say his name? I'm terrible with names. And he has fights practically nothing but cans. I haven't actually done the math, but I really, really want to on the combined record of his opponents because it would be something like 20 and 120. He's only fought 2 guys in his career with winning records, or 2 or 3, and a couple of the guys have no wins. And he fought also the English equivalent to Bob Sapp, who had a record of 18 and 45.
Yeah, that's Sean Lomas. He fought him back in April.
Yeah, the legend. And outside of that, he's a really exciting athlete, except for the fact that he has fought nobody. So fighting another legit prospect like Labat will be very interesting to see because I think Labat's got the perfect game to completely derail Walter. Oh God, I'm going to do it again. Gahadze. I'm going to hang my head in shame while we move on.
You're fine. Yeah. So I think one of the people that I'm really this is one of those stupid things that I know I shouldn't be excited for, but at some point I can't wait to see Adam Kalaev actually debut in the UFC. I know he's not probably ever going to pan out. He was signed way too early into his career. He's got a weird skill set that doesn't promise much for MMA. The guy landed a fucking tornado kick, and like that's just so cool.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the dude is actually like a legit athlete. I mean, he's a really talented athlete. I don't think he's all that different a prospect from like Adlan Amagov when Amagov was signed. The dude was super raw, but I mean, Amagov at least had like that combat sambo background and some wrestling skills to fall back on, which Kalaev does not, and to the same extent. But
yeah, I'm sure he has some because his brother has quite a bit of combat sambo, I believe. His brother is super legit, like super legit. Hussein Kalaev.
Yeah.
But the thing he's what I love. He's a Daidojuku champion, and that's so great. Like, I mean, that's him and Semi Schilt and like one other notable guy who's fought in MMA that's not coming. Oh, is that guy Ichiharu? What's his name? Who fought Royce Gracie, that Japanese
in UFC too.
Way back in the day.
Oh,
yeah.
Those are like your Daidojuku champions in MMA.
Well, Well, hey, I mean that's not like the worst company in the world. Like being mentioned in the same breath as Semi Schilt is always a good thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, what is the deal with Holiev? Because they signed him a long time ago. They signed him like a year and a half ago, didn't they?
They signed him back in, where is it? It wasn't nearly that long ago, but it's been a while. He got signed in October of last year. So it's been a year. And he got injured. He had a debut lined up, but he got injured, and I haven't heard anything since.
Yeah, and he hasn't had a fight in now 26 months.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Holiev is like a tremendously talented dude, and if he found the right training situation, I mean, he could legitimately turn into something, not just be a fun action fighter. I mean, as it stands now, he could be a fun action fighter.
Yeah. Other than him, because that's kind of stupid. I mean, I'm excited for it, but it may never happen. Definitely still looking forward to Dooho Choi, South Korean. He's just, I mean, he has some major gaps in his skill, particularly his striking defense is basically non-existent. But he's so much fun. Just like, you know, the kind of guy that it's like it's like those like ultra balls, those bouncy balls that just go everywhere and are really crazy. It's like you just threw one of those in a cage and it knocked somebody out. That's basically how he fights.
Yeah, I mean, Dooho Choi, like if he were a video game character, would be one of those guys who just put all his skill points into offense and none into defense. It's not just his striking defense. I mean, he doesn't have great takedown defense either or great defensive grappling. But he's just such an overwhelming offensive fighter. I mean, the easy comparison for him is the Korean zombie, Chan Sung-jung, but like he's more zombie than zombie.
Yeah.
Like, he has even less regard for the future well-being of his brain and facial structure than Chan Sung-jung did. And I mean, but it's not just his striking offense either. He hits like really freaking cool like judo style takedowns and like does all sorts of really, really fun stuff in the cage. But he's had like 4 fights fall through, 3 or 4 fights that he's been scheduled for. Either he got injured or his opponent got injured or some combination of the two.
Well, he's got a pretty easy walkover lined up coming up here at UFC Fight Night Austin. He's fighting Juan Manuel Puig.
Oh, jeez.
He's just gonna murder.
Yeah, I mean, that's like not competitive.
I was gonna say I'm really excited to start delving into the South Korean scene as we start looking at some of the lighter weight classes because I really think South Korea is coming up as the Asian hotbed right now for MMA talent. As Japan has kind of fallen off as a producer of upper level fighters, I think South Korea is stepping forward and being that nation in that region to start turning out consistently good athletes who are transitioning their skills over into fighting. And I think there's a couple reasons for it. I think the strong wrestling, judo, and then obviously taekwondo programs there, just producing all sorts of combat athletes, has a lot to do with that. But it's really exciting to see some of them coming over and starting to find success, even if some of them are extraordinarily raw fighters. They're still finding success and kind of canceling out that perception for a long time in MMA that fighters coming out of Asia will struggle against American wrestlers, and we're really starting to get that concept challenged as it's turning out a lot of people other than Americans can wrestle.
Yeah, I mean, it's still like, I mean, wrestling and MMA, especially on the regional levels, is, I mean, it's still strongest in the United States. As a general rule, it's still strongest in the United States. But in Canada, it's better than it was. It's better than it was a few years back, as skill has kind of disseminated outwards from the big camps to the smaller camps. I mean, obviously, in Russia, it's at an extremely high level with the guys who are coming out of the North Caucasus, where like everybody wrestles as soon as they can walk. The skill level's getting higher there. And because youth participation rates in wrestling and judo are so high in the North Caucasus, it's like, they're just producing tremendous surpluses of athletes who aren't good enough to go into their Olympic programs and who can easily make a transition into combat sambo or directly to MMA. I mean, but in South Korea, like the judo participation rates are ridiculously high. And outside of their Olympic programs, like there's a tremendous surplus of guys who can do that. I mean, you look at Dong Yoon Kim was kind of the first guy, at least to come to the UFC with that background. But there was also Dongyi Yang. I mean, I don't know what exactly the Korean Zombie's background was before he got going in MMA, but like he clearly has some judo skills. Doo-Ho Choi also pretty obviously has some judo skills, whether he picked those up beforehand or over the course of his MMA training. He's another guy. Hyung-Gyu Lim has really tremendous takedown defense. And Yui Chul Nam, who put on a potential fight of the year in his UFC debut, has really extraordinarily good takedown defense. And I mean, I think in the case of the South Korean scene, I mean, Tom, I think you raised some really good points. And part of it is that there are organizational structures there that are in place to help produce those kinds of athletes. I mean, you can go to college in South Korea and you can effectively major in martial arts. Like, you can take classes at a university level in judo and taekwondo and other combat sports.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the martial arts community in South Korea seems to be embracing MMA, whereas in some areas where there are strong martial arts communities, such as in France, which is a really strong judo community, or in Thailand, obviously, with the Muay Thai, have actively resisted MMA coming in because it poses a threat to the infrastructure already in place, and that makes all the difference. And I think South Korea, I mean, one of my favorite new fighters is Kyung Ho Kang. Anytime that guy fights, sign me up, because he's just such a fun grappler to watch, and you can see the athleticism there, and you can see the understanding of how to fight, and it's just a matter of kind of refining it and polishing it. And I think we're going to get more and more guys out of South Korea kind of like that. And it's going to be interesting to see how the scene over in like the Eastern Pacific kind of changes as it kind of plays out, because I think we're seeing a real, I mean, obviously this isn't shocking news that we're seeing a real decline in Japanese talent. Even just doing our thing, it was shocking how few Japanese fighters even showed up on our radar, and then after one or two looks we saw that they weren't like top 10 prospect material. Whereas, like 10 years ago, there would have been, Japanese fighters would have been a must look at when compiling a list of top prospects in MMA or top welterweight prospects in MMA.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Zane.
I was gonna say, I think a big part of that actually, and what we may see is that we've finally seen a proper scaling down of Japanese talent to fit a landscape that more is better identified with what their what their talent pool can actually produce. Like, we're actually finally seeing I think we're seeing guys now starting to come out at the very lightest weight classes, flyweight, bantamweight, maybe even a few featherweights that can be really competitive and good. But we're not getting, there's no longer this idea that they're going to produce lightweights or welterweights or middleweights that, 5 or 10 years ago, they'd be like, oh yeah, well, this guy's going to be really competitive. And he was competitive in a much less athletically competitive landscape. But they're not really producing like guys that can fight at above 155 pounds and be really athletically competitive.
Yeah, I mean, the Japanese scene now is so strange, and given the amount of MMA there, I think off the top of my head, I would say that I would expect that kind of the depth of the Japanese scene to be producing more top level fighters, but partially because of the frequency with which they compete. I mean, those guys are always going to have losses on their record, and they're not really gonna pop up the same way that American prospects do at 6-0, 8-0, 10-0. Partially because there are more draws, they're more likely to score drawn rounds. But also, I mean, I think there's been a real and I don't think it's a coincidence that the big time Japanese prospects that we've seen come out of there recently, like Yuta Sasaki and Michinori Tanaka, to name two of them, are guys who did most of their work outside of Japanese promotions. Like Tanaka came up in PXC, in Pacific Extreme Combat. Sasaki did. I think Sasaki had a couple of fights there while doing more in Japanese promotions. Kyoji Horiguchi came up in Japanese promotions, but really, I mean, it's kind of a Shark Tank of mediocre to good fighters, and it's hard to get out of there and separate yourself from the pack.
I think probably a big part of that too is that it seems to be a very learn as you go style of like development, fighter development. It's like we're just going to keep throwing you into fights, whatever we have, whatever's available at any level, and you're going to learn how to fight as you fight. Like you're not going to get a lot of great coaching and tutoring, coming in. You see these guys, and it's just like, how did you get this amalgam of skills 5 years into your career? Because none of it really functions as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean there are arguments to be made about the kind of style of training that you get in Japan, and I don't know that I'm really qualified to talk in depth about that. There are people who know that scene a lot better than I do. But I mean, I think from a results perspective, the kind of aggregate effect of all of these different strands that we've been talking about have been that there is not like a ton of top level talent coming out of there. Certainly, it's an amount of talent that is disproportionate to the population. Like, given the number of people in Japan, and given the number of people who are doing combat sports in Japan, and given the number of promotions that are putting on fights in Japan, like all of those factors should point to there being a lot more talented prospects coming out of there. Whereas, with South Korea, I mean, we're seeing about the right number of fighters come out that we would expect based on the strength of the scene there. Which makes for a change.
I was hoping to find one Korean light heavyweight out there that would just be like ridiculously amazing, or a middleweight or something like that. But I just don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you could have there could be a Dongyi Yang who is 5'10" and fighting at 240 pounds at heavyweight.
Yeah,
we can always hope.
We can always hope.
I mean,
no, it's definitely one of those. It's gonna. Japan's still kind of a mystery spot, I think, in some ways, where it's just like, yeah, it's not producing in the ways it was, but there are some signs of life there. Just not. I don't know. It's hard to know what to cling to,
Well, and it'll be interesting to see what kinds of broader network effects the UFC's partnership with Vale Tudo Japan and that whole thing. I mean, they seem to be very hopeful about that process, and maybe that'll like have some trickle down effect on the quality of the regional scene in Japan and the way that they book fights and put fights together and the way that they train. But I don't know. I mean, that's that's all hypotheticals.
So, one of the things I wanted to talk a bit about was sort of this idea, like, I've been looking at a lot of light heavyweights lately, and man, is that a strange division. It's not yeah, it's not nearly as bad as I would have thought going in. Like, I watched a lot of bad fights, but there's some more talent out there than I would have expected. But a lot of it, I look at and I think this guy's just not going to get to the UFC because they don't scout, they don't tend to scout out light heavyweight talent. Like, if I see some guy that's like 5-0 or 9-2 and looks pretty good, I'm not thinking, oh man, he's going to the UFC. So I'm thinking, man, I'm more likely to see him fight somebody in Bellator in the near future than I am in the UFC. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think Bellator, just kind of by its nature, being this smaller promotion and kind of being this inheriting this second position to the UFC way before it was ready to. I mean, let's be honest. It got, when Strikeforce went down rather suddenly, Bellator was not ready to step into that space. It had to kind of think outside the box when it came to scouting and finding prospects. They were the first ones to really go into Russia. I mean, I remember that being where they were just piling up Russian prospects. I feel like Bellator kind of has made their bones by casting a wider net than the UFC from the beginning, So I don't think it's surprising that we're finding them out scouting the UFC in the I should say the shallower weight classes of light heavyweight and heavyweight. Also because they're willing to go. I feel like they were willing to bring guys in. Up until recently, the UFC was a little bit more cautious on bringing people in. Now with Fight Pass cards and things like that, they've kind of thrown that into the wind, and they seem to be taking a more Bellator-like approach. And there might be something to that in the sense that they're sick of having Bellator scoop guys up before the UFC is ready to commit on a guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a couple of really important points there. That the way that Bellator managed to survive in the early years of the Rebny era, so say from 2011 to say mid 2013, there was like a 2-year stretch there where the way that Bellator managed to carve itself out a market footprint was by exploiting market inefficiencies in the prospect scouting game. That like Tom pointed out, they went into Russia and they found a whole bunch of dudes who were really good. They found Andrei Koreshkov, they found Tiger Sarnovsky. I mean, they found Frodo Kospulayev. They found who's the dude that Mike Richmond just Shabulat Shamalayev. They found a whole crop of really, really, really talented fighters, and the willingness to bring guys in a fight or two earlier than the UFC would have, especially paid dividends for them at the shallowest weight classes, because they could bring a guy in who was 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, and say we'll give you a couple of fights on the undercard, like they did with Bubba Jenkins. Bubba Jenkins is a good example of that. Who is the other guy? Darian Caldwell, another good example of that, where they could pick up these guys really early and give them build-up fights against local jobbers on the undercard, where that's less of a possibility for the UFC. I think Tom is also exactly right that the UFC is more willing to do things like that now. They'll look at perfect example of this, Colby Covington, whom they signed in August to fight on the Macau card, who 2 years ago, Colby Covington is never in the UFC as a 5-0 fighter with 0 wins over guys with a winning record. But now they can put him on the undercard of a pretty crappy card in Macau against a guy who's not at all UFC caliber, whatever you take that term to mean, and they can just watch Covington beat the crap out of him in under 2 rounds.
That's true. I think one of the things though is that I think the one place we haven't seen it, because I would say we're even starting to see that with heavyweight in the UFC just in the past year or two has become they've become much better about going out and getting guys like Victor Pesta and Ruslan Magomedov, and even as bad as he was, Ron Potts. Just saying, okay, well, you've got a decent record. We need the guy. We'll go get you and see how you shake out. But I'm still not seeing that at all at light heavyweight. And the thing I can pull out of looking at the regional scene, or looking at all these guys on the regional scene, is it's not like the talent potential isn't there. It's not like there aren't guys that they could be going out and grabbing, but you're still seeing them go out and pick somebody up like Hans Stringer, who they took off a loss in World Series of Fighting, like 35 fights into his career.
Yeah, I mean, at light heavyweight and heavyweight, the lesson here, and to come back to the point about them being shallow weight classes, is you can't afford to miss on guys. There was about a 1.5 year long stretch where Bellator, not just relative to its position in the landscape, it literally outsigned the UFC in terms of quality light heavyweight and heavyweight prospects. And they missed out on a whole bunch of dudes who, while they may not have been champions, would have been solid top 10 to top 15 fighters in those weight classes. So Blagoy Ivanov, Alexander Volkov, Vitaly Minikov at heavyweight. I mean, even like a Ryan Martinez is not a bad dude to be on a Fight Pass prelim for the UFC. He's not like a good fighter by any stretch of the imagination, but he is a perfectly reasonable low tier heavyweight to have on your roster. And Bellator just went out and they found those guys earlier than the UFC, and for a variety of reasons, either they were willing to bring in guys who were pretty raw, or they were willing to take a chance on guys who had no name and no real big camp or anything like that. I mean, they were willing to take those chances, and because of the structure of their organization, they could do that.
Yeah, because the worst that happens is if they get a guy who doesn't quite pan out, then he's tournament fodder. He's a guy that can, that is content to ride in the tournament, and they can test their new guys next year around against, or put one of their established stars against and let them beat up a little bit. That tournament structure just let them like recycle guys in to a greater extent than I feel like the UFC feels they can recycle guys on like main cards, because putting them in the tournament, if they win the first round, then they kind of get that boost and they become like a main card fighter again. They become a TV fighter again.
Yeah, well, recently the guys Bellator's missed on would be like Luis Philippe Lins and Liam McGeary. Like, not getting Liam McGeary, you watch Liam McGeary fight in Bellator, and then you go watch Nikita Krylov fight Cody Donovan in the UFC. Like, that's a bad miss.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, even guys like and these are two guys who could actually come back around. And we're getting this will take us a little bit out of the light heavyweight and heavyweight thing, but like Slava Vasilevsky, who's now the M1 middleweight champion, had a run in a Bellator tournament, and Sultan Aliyev, who had a run in a Bellator tournament and is now back fighting on the Russian scene.
Aliyev's in the UFC now. The UFC did actually go out and get him. Yeah.
Really, I totally missed that. But like, those were dudes who, like, the UFC could and should have taken a flyer on Vasilevsky a couple of years ago. After he had run off 3 or 4 wins after leaving Bellator, he wasn't bound by by an M1 contract at that point. They should have picked him back up. And even if he eventually drops to welterweight, and he probably should, like that's still a dude who's out there that that's going to be a strong contender for. It's going to be a strong contender for you at middleweight, and middleweight's an increasingly thin division.
Yeah.
Or like Aliyev, yeah, like there's no reason not to sign Aliyev at this point. There was no reason not to sign him when Bellator did. I mean, he was raw, but like he was clearly competitive with the crappy light heavyweights that Bellator had at that point.
And to a certain extent, I think we're starting to see UFC doing that because they have a place for those guys now. In the previous structure, they didn't have a place, and I think we all agree that we don't. Like, I don't think any of us has any problems with the UFC Fight Pass cards. I think my biggest issue is that they will stack a card of these raw prospects on it and then put 2 top 10 fighters on top of it to draw some interest. But I think the Fight Pass is the perfect venue for the UFC to start this prospect building process, because we're starting to see. I think we're seeing a shift in prospect development. John Jones kind of ruined the curve for a lot of prospects because he just came in and just was incredible from day one. But I think we're seeing generally a greater push where longer development is better for fighters. And that's not true in every case, but generally speaking, I mean, we're seeing it, and non-American prospects specifically, because what we talked about in Japan, I think is true in Brazil, I think it's true in Russia, that you have to do quite a bit to stand out, especially when there's heavy parity in an area like the one that's developed in Eastern Europe. It's getting hard to stand out over there. So the fighters that get picked up tend to be fighters with 15 fights on their record, as opposed to some of the Americans who Bellator or the UFC will scoop up when they're 5-6-0. So you get more experienced fighters coming in, and I think we're going to start seeing that become more of the norm, as and maybe not so much in terms of like they don't sign to the UFC until they've had 15 fights, but the UFC might pick them up when they have 5 fights, and then we don't see that guy off a Fight Pass until like another 5 or 6 fights after that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a real underlying structural shift there that's responsible for that, and it has to do with the number of cards the UFC is running, and more specifically, the number of cards the UFC is running in North America, where you have to have short notice replacements, a steady stream of them all the time. So, back in the old days, a guy may have had 3 years to develop on the regional scene in the U.S. before they got the call up, and that would still be a relatively short development curve for a guy, but it was longer. So like John Jones was 3 months, and he breaks that curve, especially for guys in 2008. Like, 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been super uncommon for a guy to have 4 or 5 fights in 3 months and then end up in the UFC or in Pride. Like Alistair Overeem had his first fight like October 20th, and then had a fight in the Rings promotion like 10 days later. And this was in 1999. Like Big Nog had his first fight and then was in Rings within like 3 months. But as time has gone on, those development curves lengthened out to the point where John Jones to the UFC in 3 months is like holy phenom, Batman. I mean, but so this whole oversaturation thing, like when you have so many slots that you have to fill, like you get Aljamain Sterling, who probably signed a fight or two before he should have. Mirsad Bektic won his debut against Chaz Skelly, a guy who was more experienced and actually had that kind of, rarely enough, that kind of regional experience in the U.S. But that was a rough fight for him, and a fight that if one thing had gone slightly differently, he would have lost that fight. And we could pile up these examples. I mean, Zane and I talked about Mike Rhodes, who got signed way, way, way too early. But increasingly, those guys who have 3 or 4 years of experience on the regional scene in the U.S. are harder and harder to find. When you go overseas, where the UFC isn't running cards constantly, and they don't have that constant need for late notice replacements, they're not scraping the talent pool nearly as thin, and so guys get that development time. Conor McGregor, another good example of a guy who got basically 4 years on the regional scene to develop.
Yeah, no, the problem, and this is actually something that's become really problematic when scouting for doing, trying to find these guys. Part of it is I feel like I should be trying to find good American prospects too, because man, we have some Russian heavy lists going on. Like,
yeah.
It's really easy to find great Russian prospects. Really easy. You can throw a dead cat without can't swing a dead cat without hitting a great Russian prospect. But you want to find great American prospects, and the thing is that even if they're out there, you're talking about guys. You have to be scouting guys who have 2, 3, 4 pro fights, and who probably have 0 available tape.
Yeah, if you want to find probably the next great American light heavyweight out there, read Coach Mike's list of the NCAA wrestling rankings for this year.
Yeah.
Going up on Bloody Elbow, because the guy who's going to be like the next great American is probably in a wrestling room somewhere, focusing on his NCAA career, or isn't even in MMA yet. Because the American prospects, when they hit, tend to come out of nowhere. They tend to. I mean, that was a discussion. I forget who was having that discussion, but when the American prospects come, and especially at the heavyweights, man, they come out of nowhere. I mean, how quickly was Cain Velasquez went from his debut to being champion?
2 fights before he got to the UFC.
Yeah.
And then his 9 fights. His fight against Lesnar was his 10th pro fight, right?
Yeah. I mean, they when the American prospects come on fast in the heavyweight classes, they come on fast because they're usually a fantastic athlete in one of the component sports of MMA, who then make the transition and just have that game and that sense and that kind of feel about themselves that cause them to pick up MMA very, very quickly. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at, because we see a lot of the Americans. This actually was something that a discussion that you, Pat, were having on Twitter earlier, kind of talking about what happened to Phil Davis, and I really feel he's kind of the classic example of good wrestler, good athlete, but just something about his game just doesn't fully. Something about his game and something about his particular, personal brand of athleticism just didn't translate to higher level MMA, and you kind of know after like 4 or 5 years of those guys being in there, you kind of get a real sense for it if they're either going to be that like standout guy or if they're just going to kind of fall into that one of the top 15 sort of guys.
Yeah, and I mean, Davis is a really interesting example of the thinness of light heavyweight as a weight class in general. Because you take a guy with Davis's exact skill sets and you put him at welterweight, and he's probably not even close to being a top 25 fighter. Like, those weight classes are just so much more deep they're just so much deeper that when you get out of that combination of skills just isn't going to do it for you. I mean, like what I was saying about Davis is that there is something fundamentally broken with his striking fundamentals. There are real basic issues with the way that he throws strikes. The most basic things, the mechanics, are broken. I mean, It's like it's the striking equivalent of a dude shooting a double leg who just bends at the waist,
Yeah.
like who just bends forward and falls into takedowns.
I'm trying
And
to think of a fundamentally sound striker out of Alliance MMA.
I would say Miles Jury has pretty good fundamentals, but Jury's fundamentals were set when he got to Alliance. They brought him in. God, I can't remember what fight that was. They brought him in to work with somebody at Alliance, and he just kind of stuck around. Like
Mm-hmm.
they brought him in as a training partner for somebody's camp, and he just
Kind,
stuck.
kind of
But
like the Greg Jackson effect, where the guys going to Jackson Winklejohn with solid fundamentals in place tend to be the better strikers at that camp, as opposed to the guys brought up by Winklejohn and Jackson.
yeah, I mean, like Donald Cerrone has his own Muay Thai coach, Henry Smith, and has for years. I mean, he'll work. I mean, he'll do work with like Brandon Gibson and Mike Winklejohn, but his striking coach is Henry Smith. But yeah, I mean, like in terms of a homegrown striker from Alliance, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. I mean, Ross Pearson was basically was not a finished product as a striker, but his fundamentals were set by the time he got there. Dominic Cruz is a homegrown product, but or a largely homegrown product. But I wouldn't say that he's like a super fundamentally sound striker.
You would never point to Cruz as like, oh, this is a guy who does everything right and that's why he wins.
He's the example that a lot of people made of Keith Jardine. I think Cruz is the awkward guy, and I think anyone who's done any sort of striking art or anything that involves moving and hitting stuff at the same time can speak to the athletic guy who does things wrong, but they're just right enough to work, and it just throws off everything that you do. And I kind of get that feel off of Cruz.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just a really hard combination of stuff to deal with. But I mean, in general, to bring it back around to Phil Davis real quick, like when you have a weight class that's just that much thinner than everything else, you're not forced to correct it. You're not necessarily forced to correct those flaws immediately the way that you are at a deeper weight. Like.
One thing I want to get to with that is that I actually think we're coming to a point that we've almost got two different sports right now. It's basically flyweight to welterweight and then middleweight to heavyweight. Like the fundamentals of what makes both those two halves of MMA are becoming kind of drastically different.
Yeah,
I think. Oh, go ahead, Pat.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was gonna say you see that in I know you see it in wrestling, though I can't speak to the specific differences in the metagame of wrestling at heavyweight versus the lighter weight classes, but I can very much in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling competition. Very different games emerge in the lighter weight classes, where one of the things that it's really signature of the lighter weight classes in Jiu-Jitsu and grappling is the prevalence of the inverted guard and the relative ineffectiveness of leg locks, where you just get guys with rubber feet who you can just toe hold all day and they just don't care, versus you have the really obviously like smash and pass games of the heavyweights and the medium heavyweights and the more traditional guard games at the upper weight classes. I think we're seeing a similar divergence in MMA, where just naturally, based on the different types of athleticism that come with different body types and different sizes, the games are kind of forming to around that. And I think in Phil Davis's case, I don't know if he's really the victim of the MMA metagame and that he doesn't play it. I just think he's, for lack of a better term, I feel like he's the reverse Melvin Gillard, where you have Melvin Gillard, who is a really good athlete, a really good striker, and just something about grappling never quite clicked with him. Just something about it does not match up with him. And I feel like Phil Davis is kind of the opposite. Guys, the man is a genius grappler on the ground, but it just doesn't seem like striking really clicks with him. It doesn't seem like he gets it. It doesn't seem like he really embraces it, and you're seeing the result of an incomplete game.
Yeah, I mean, in Davis's case, I think a striking coach who was really, really strong on fundamentals, like Like Trevor Whitman, I think, is a good example of a guy who does a really, really excellent job of teaching the mechanical basics. Or Henry Hooft is another guy who does a really fantastic job teaching the absolute basics. Kind of an underrated guy flying under the radar a little bit. Stephen Wright out of Team Takedown. Johnny Hendricks' striking coach, is a good example of a guy who's really strong on those fundamentals. Dwayne Ludwig, strong on fundamentals. I think a guy like that, if Davis were willing to put in the time and just like chuck basically everything he's learned out the window and start over from scratch, I think you could make Phil Davis into a decent striker. And with Gillard, the failure to turn into a guy with decent submission defense also had to do with just his athleticism in general. That when you're that good of an athlete and you can scramble that way, I mean, and I know Tom, you've been on the ground with guys like this where it's like they have a cheat code, and when you can scramble that way, when you create space out of seemingly nowhere, like that you never end up learning basic fundamentals of submission defense.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you can only go so far with it, and depending on your athleticism, your ceiling will be different if you don't kind of embrace the fundamentals of whatever game it is that you're doing. And Gillard had a high ceiling, but I mean it's very clear when he hits it. And I mean that's just different athletes respond to different coaching and different aspects of fighting. And Gillard is a guy that really likes to strike, and he's made a good living for himself, and he's turned himself into a pretty good fighter. So it's worked for him. It's just that I don't think that's clearly that it's kind of like with Phil Davis. Again, fantastic fighter. Let's not confuse things. He's a really good fighter. It's just that when he came in, everyone expected him to break through that next level, and it's been really interesting to watch a guy that he choked out with a really ingenious choke in Alexander Gustafsson to be the guy to break through that next level and leave his now friend Phil Davis in his wake.
Well, yeah, and like with Davis, I mean, to come back to the question of physicality and physical tools real quick, like Gillard and scramble and his athleticism making him, giving him like a cheat code with the scrambles, Davis's frame gave him a bit of a cheat code with the striking. When you're 6'2" and you have a 79-inch reach, and you have really long legs, and you can reach guys at places where they don't think they can get hit. Maybe you don't ever bother to learn fundamentals because really proper fundamentals, because you can just hit those guys at really incredible ranges. I mean, maybe part of it.
That could certainly be part of it. I think. Well, and I hate to say this, but guys with long reaches in MMA almost always seem to be really shitty range fighters. Almost always. Like, how many guys with really long arms do you see in MMA that have a really great jab and just work that jab and work behind the jab and do that really effectively?
I'm on Jones.
Really? I mean,
he seems to keep guys at range fairly well. This is by MMA standards.
With a jab. I mean, I don't think it has to be with a jab.
Guys use kicks really effectively to set up their distance. I feel like that's one of Jones' big tools.
Jones can keep guys away because his arms have seriously put him into like a whole separate area code, and he doesn't really have to do much. But like the longer his career's gone on, the more he's become just an infighter.
Well, that's good because clinch fighting is what got him here, and then he kind of started becoming that outside fighter for a little while. And I think it's good that he's going back to infighting a bit.
Well, sure, I'm just saying that you don't see like you see a guy with really long arms all like, oh, imagine how he's gonna do it range. Louis Smolka is like a 5'10" flyweight. Imagine how he's gonna do it range, and dude just brawls in the pocket. Like, yeah. That is the core game of so many big, tall, rangy fighters.
I'm struggling to think of a counterexample for you, Zane. And I got I think McGregor has a nice jab.
Yeah,
but he's not like a super long guy for the weight class. I mean, he's 5'8". I mean, he has long arms, but he's still 5'8". He's not like a super long guy for the weight. Anthony Pettis is relatively long for lightweight, but he's not super big. But he's got nice little range finding tools.
Yeah, I mean, here and there are guys. I mean, great strikers are going to be great strikers, but I'm just saying that, like, you don't really tend to see the MMA, like, training environment doesn't really seem to be built on, like, oh, I'm a tall guy, I'm going to work on being good at range.
Okay,
Like,
Yeah.
I found the right counterexample for you, Zane.
yeah.
Weidman. Weidman throws a lovely jab, and he's got really long arms, and he's very rangy.
Yeah, well, okay. That's Sarah Longo. That's a whole different thing.
That doesn't count if they have good coaches.
No. You wanted a counterexample. I gave you a
No, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. I'm just saying that.
counterexample.
I mean, the thing I love about Sarah Longo is that camp has, like, I mean, at least according to Sherdog, which, you know, is the center for most of my who's at what camp info, that camp's got like 20 guys at it. And it's produced, what is it, 3 world champions for the UFC? Matt Serra, Chris Weidman, maybe it's only 2.
Yeah, two champions, but yeah, I mean it's a quality over quantity thing.
Yeah.
I mean for the Sherdog top 10 for next week that I'm writing is top 10 corners, and after a whole lot of hemming and hawing between us about how we were going to define that, I mean, you know, Sarah Longo is still on everybody's list, despite the fact that, you know, quantity of fighters that you turn out was like an actual criterion. I mean, like I don't know if anybody does a better job of teaching basic boxing fundamentals, both offensively and defensively, than Ray Longo. I mean, Trevor Whitman probably teaches better offensive fundamentals, but defense is a bigger problem. I mean, and just the overall quality of training that guys get there. I mean, they have a demonstrated track record of building guys up from the very beginning of their careers.
Well,
Yeah, if I saw a guy coming out of that camp right now who was winning consistently, like had 5 or 6 wins, I would just be like, this guy's a prospect. You know, it's like Aljamain Sterling. It's like, this guy's a prospect. Everybody watch. I don't even need to see the footage. I don't care what tape's out there. Just keep them on your radar.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it speaks to more of something that we're seeing where, for a long time the talk was about, oh, imagine when we get the real athletes in MMA. Imagine when we start pulling the athletes that would do other professional sports into MMA. And I think to some degree we're seeing that. We're definitely seeing a higher caliber of athlete. The average level of athlete has risen in MMA. And I think we're starting to get to the point where you're seeing it like in other sports, where athleticism isn't a guarantee of success. I don't think it's ever been in MMA, but I think it's becoming less so. Because, I mean, in every sport, there are fantastic athletes who underperform. And I think we're getting to that point in MMA where it's not just about your athleticism. Who is your coach? Who is teaching you how to fight? How are you training? How to train MMA is one of those things that people have been trying to figure out since MMA started as a sport, and we're still not there yet. We still don't have like a defined basic concept of what even, like, we're just starting to get to the point where people can define what the fundamentals of MMA really are. That was still a debate even 5-6 years ago about like what do you need to know to be a fundamental MMA fighter, and it's moved beyond just the simple wrestling, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai definition that, oh, just do those 3 things and then get in a cage and mix them together every so often, sort of system that we were using to produce fighters earlier. So I think we're really moving into that. The camps that get what MMA is and how to teach it are really starting to emerge, and I think Sarah Longo is one of those teams that just gets it. Nova Uniao being another one, even though they're not having the best year, their consistent success in MMA kind of shows to me that they're the lone Brazilian camp that seems to get what modern MMA is. And I think I'd put up a couple other camps up there, but we're starting to see some separation as teams like, I don't want to throw ATT under the bus, but they've declined a little bit, and I think that's they're kind of on that older path of training MMA, whereas we have teams kind of pushing the envelope.
Well, I mean, the landscape of teams is kind of a constantly shifting thing. But you know, to come back to the point you were making about, you know, if you see Sarah Longo has a guy who's 5-0 or 6-0, you're automatically thinking that this dude's probably a top prospect. I mean, same deal with alpha male. Like, I don't know if you guys have watched tape on Cody Garbrandt, but he's Lance Palmer's boy from Ohio, who's been out to Alpha Male to train with them a bunch. But I think he's 5-0, and Cody Garbrandt, like even without watching tape on him, I would have put him as probably a top 10 bantamweight. Like after having watched tape on him and seeing the difference between what he can do and the kind of like solid regional bantamweights, like guys who are 3-0, 4-0, 5-0 that he's beating, like. You can see from it those guys who start from the very beginning at a big camp like that with those kinds of training partners and those kinds of coaches. I mean, the network effects are just ridiculous. Like and guys like that, guys who fit that profile, who are 5-0 or 6-0 from a big camp, those are guys who are actually capable of taking a call from the UFC even on short notice and performing well. Like, so I mean, it's the Shark Tank where the game is evolving at a ridiculously fast pace. And to come back to the points that you were making about metagame and athleticism, Tom, I mean, and the difference between what's happening at flyweight to welterweight and middleweight, light heavyweight and heavyweight, like those kinds of next level could play other sports athletes. We're actually seeing them at the lighter weight classes more than we are at our higher weight classes. And that's part of the reason why the metagame is changing as fast as it is and why we're seeing those changes at the lighter weights instead of the heavier ones. You have more fighters, you have more excellent coaches. I mean, just the more fighters thing in general, more fighters means more fights, means more evolution, means more opportunities for things to change. And
one of the things that you really can see changing already just in the athletic game and in the metagame because of the differences in athletics is think about how many times recently from welterweight down to flyweight, you've seen really big, important fights decided by who had the better takedown offense. Mm-hmm. Like who had the better top control takedown game. It's not that many. Guys are not getting lay and pray. They're not getting held down and ground out at the lighter weight classes anymore. Like having a really strong, powerful top game is just not nearly as valuable as it used to be. Whereas, you look at heavyweight, and it's basically ruled by a guy with a top game.
Well, and, I mean, part of that plays into the athleticism thing, right? But, like, the counter to lay and pray is a guy who can scramble and create space and get back to his feet. And more athletic guys can do that better. There are more of them at the lighter weight classes, and part of that explains why Alpha Male has been successful for as long as it has been, because they teach really, really, like, next-level top control.
Yeah.
And a top control that's flexible enough to deal with scramblers. And if those guys do want to try and get scramble back to their feet, they have the guillotine choke. And like that's those are concrete examples of adaptations to the particular brand of metagame that's evolved at those lighter weight classes.
Well, and pretty much the biggest one is that you're seeing guys now who shoot a takedown, immediately get up and look to strike while the person that they took down is standing up. Like, that's the game now, is I threw you to the ground, and rather than trying to follow you immediately and submit you there or, work my ground and pound, I'm just going to use the compromised position of you transitioning back to your feet as the point where I can hurt you the most.
Yeah, it's something that I think it's part of the transition away from the pure wrestling game, where when someone tries to take you down, you fight it you fight it to the last breath. You do not get taken down. Whereas in more grappling and jiu-jitsu tournaments and even in other ones like sambo, there is a point where you say, okay, I'm being taken down. Like, this guy's in on my hips. At this point, do I want to fight the takedown, or do I want to win the next phase? Do I want to win the transition to the ground? And we're seeing more guys give up the fight on the takedown and focus on then, okay, the next transition is to the ground. What do I want to do? I want to be a step ahead on that transition. And a lot of them will use it to escape out their hips and stand up. Some guys will. One example I always think of is Nick Diaz versus Cyborg, where he threw up the armbar almost immediately after being taken down, and that was a classic example of Diaz did not care he was being taken down. His focus became, what's the next step? All right, I'm going down, I'm going to my closed guard, I'm trapping his armbar. And it's that win the transition and be a step ahead rather than fight a losing battle.
Well, and to give a relatively recent example, when Tim Kennedy was in on Yoel Romero's hips, Romero decided that he was basically going to concede the takedown, but he grabbed a Kimura. And as soon as Kennedy got him down, I mean, Romero, it's not like Romero's shoulder blades touched or anything, so he didn't really concede the takedown, but he let Kennedy drag him down, and then he just rolled into the Kimura and used that to stand back up. Like, I mean,
Romero's one of the only guys above 170 that you really see playing that lighter weight metagame.
yeah, I would agree with that.
And
But I
that
mean,
usually bespeaks a special athlete with a special understanding of the sport he's in.
Dan Cormier is another good example of a guy who's perfectly fine, slamming you down, letting you stand back up a little bit, and he's going to hit you while you're getting back up. I mean, two prospects that I know Tom has or not prospects anymore. I guess one of them isn't. That Tom has a special love for. Albert Tumanov, I mean, is a guy who's all about that transition game. Like the way that he double tap head kicked Matt Dwyer a couple of weeks back. I mean, we're talking about a guy who, knocks him down with the head kick, lets him get back up, as immediately throwing as he's getting back up, and that's Tumanov's game. I mean, like, he's a fine range striker, he's a fine wrestler, he's a fine grappler, but what makes him like a special dude who could be a legit like top 5, top 10 kind of guy is the fact that he can do that damage in transition. The guy that I think is the very best prospect in the world, regardless of weight right now, Tom Duquesnoy, is an insane scrambler, insane in transitions, always looking to hit you in those little vulnerable interstitial spaces, like where you can't really defend because you're trying to not get taken down or you're trying to stand back up or whatever.
Yeah, he's a guy I'm really looking forward to getting to when we get to the featherweights, because he is an exciting guy to watch.
And he's Tom. I could talk about Duquesnoy all day, but he's got that little bit of extra nasty to him, that little bit of mean that you always love to see. Like a guy who's willing to maybe just grab the fence just the once to make sure that he doesn't get taken down. He'll maybe graze your cup with an inside leg kick. He'll hit you once more after you're out just to be sure. Like
I think that's something that we should save for the next one of these. We should get into the dirty fighting should be a topic, I think.
Yeah.
And what makes good dirty fighting in MMA? Because we don't want to go too long on this. I mean, we could talk about this all day, but nobody's going to listen to a 2-hour podcast. So, I think we got to a lot of what we wanted to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about still. But thanks for coming on. I think we should wrap it up.
Hey, this was a hell of a lot of fun. Can't wait to do it again, guys.
Yeah, this was fantastic. I'm really looking forward to continuing this show. Hopefully, I'll get the time right, and hopefully my Chrome won't die on me. Yeah, and otherwise, this has been fantastic.
All right, cool. Well, as always, so for now, at least, we're doing this all on MMANation.com and Bloody Elbow. I think that's where you're gonna find this for the near future. But if you like the video, like it on Facebook. That actually means something. I know it's stupid as it sounds. And you can follow me at bzanesimon and Patrick at Patrick_Wyman and
_Wyman.
Tom at T _Grant. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for talking about this, and I think we got to go on to the next one for this.